Hello everyone and welcome to The Political Dispatch, the podcast that puts politics and current affairs into context. My name is Tom Spare. My fellow co-hosts Sid and Lily aren't with me this week, but we'll be back as a trio next time for part 2 of our mini-series called Lessons in Conflict and Peace. I want to jump on here and talk about a real gear change in US politics. In the early hours of Wednesday, the 5th of November, Zohran Mamdani was elected mayor of New York. A year ago, he was an unknown. On January the 1st, he will be in charge of an administration responsible for servicing the United States' largest city by population. Alongside Mamdani's success, the Democratic Party had notable wins for the governorship of New Jersey and Virginia and California, which I'll explore later in the episode, as well as covering the federal government shutdown and the demolition of the White House East Wing. But first, I want to take you back to a year ago when I was in Washington, D.C. After a late dinner, I got a taxi over to Union Pub on 201 Massachusetts Avenue Northeast in the shadow of the Capitol building to watch the election night play out in real time. When I arrived at the Union Pub around 9:30 p.m, the place was packed out. I didn't even bother trying to get to the bar, and I was cramped in a corner. I watched the dual screen showing CNN and Fox News. The Liberal commentators started the night confident, the Conservatives a little sheepish and uncertain. As I was watching the TV screens, trying not to get in the way, a cameraman and a news presenter set up right in front of me. I pressed myself into the nook in a wall as the presenter pressed a finger on his earpiece and then flicked through messages on his phone. Someone in the pub recognised the presenter. He gestured to keep things quiet. He needed to be in and out very quickly. The cameraman nodded his head. The presenter drew up a microphone to his lips and started his piece to camera. He then seemed to move backwards and disappeared into the next room, his colleague following suit. After the presenter and his colleague had left the pub, I headed over to the bar to grab a drink. At the bar, I got talking to 3 Georgetown University students. One student was English, the other 2 were Indian. I had little insight to offer on election night itself other than the talking points I'd picked up online and on TV, plus a couple of modules from my undergraduate degree over a decade earlier. This was enough to make me the table's de facto expert on US politics. The results were rolling in, the pendulum was swinging, and a winner was beginning to emerge. When North Carolina was called, that was it. What had been a packed bar when I'd arrived a couple of hours earlier was now starting to thin out. In Democrat D.C., the 45th president becoming the 47th was unwelcome news. The students I'd spent the last hour or so with had no interest in staying to see Trump do any sort of speech. We said our goodbyes and they left. I remained in the bar until closing time. Later, in my hotel, I watched Trump's victory speech. There was a huge cast of characters behind him, including family members, close allies, and an odd assortment of right-wing celebrities. It was as if Trump was collecting a Golden Globe or an Emmy, and he was thanking his producing partners and the writers and the other actors. Trump had completed the greatest comeback of modern political times. He'd won the popular vote, making gains in almost every part of the United States. He'd won the electoral college, and he was likely to win the Congress too. With a conservative Supreme Court, Trump had completed the hat-trick, controlling the White House, the legislature, and the courts. He had everything he needed to reshape the United States of America. So, a couple of months later, we had the inauguration. Due to Arctic conditions, the inauguration moved indoors to the Capitol building's rotunda. This marked the first indoor presidential inauguration since Ronald Reagan's second term in 1985. The smaller guest list included notable figures like outgoing President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, former Presidents Obama, Bush and Clinton, and Hillary Clinton. Also attending were outgoing Vice President Kamala Harris, former Vice Presidents Mike Pence and Dan Quayle, and high-profile tech leaders like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai, and TikTok CEO Xu Zhiqiu. The event carried the pomp and ceremony of previous inaugurations, but felt more intimate. The interior grandeur and smaller crowd allowed cameras to easily capture reactions, giving the occasion a unique atmosphere. So the speech itself, Trump's 2,885-word, 30-minute inaugural address, struck a distinctly optimistic tone, contrasting with the 2017 focus on American carnage by declaring the golden age of America begins right now. Delivered after VP J.D. Vance's swearing in, the speech functioned as a policy to-do list focused on setting a firm agenda and repealing Biden-era policies. Policy centered on three areas: border security, the economy, and government reform. On the border, Trump declared a national emergency, vowing to use the military and the 1798 Alien and Seditions Act to expel illegal crossings and gang members. Economically, he announced a national energy emergency, promising to increase domestic drilling, declaring "we will drill, baby, drill," and the rollback of Green New Deal EV mandate. Trade policy overhauls as well, like tariffs managed by an external revenue service. Culturally and internationally, Trump vowed swift action. He planned to create a Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, to reduce bureaucracy, promised to end censorship, and stated official policy would recognize only two genders, male and female. He committed to reinstating military personnel expelled over the COVID-19 vaccine with full back pay. Provocative international goals included renaming the Gulf of Mexico and taking back the Panama Canal. Trump immediately signed a record number of executive orders, for example, pulling out the Paris Accords, attempting to end birthright citizenship, to implement his promises. So if we're to fast forward to now, we're 9 months into Trump's second term, and there's so much to cover. There's not enough time to cover it all, but here's a snapshot. Trump fell out with tech billionaire Elon Musk pretty quickly. The Doge department, set up to cut federal government waste, was meant to save American taxpayers $2 trillion. It saved roughly $163 billion, although a lot of those savings have since been reversed because there was a lot of sackings which were proved to be unlawful. Musk's involvement was controversial because he was cutting in a lot of departments he had contracts with, as well as gaining access to top secret information and insight. The Trump administration closed down a large part of USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Reports have estimated that hundreds of thousands of people around the world have died as a result. The Department of Health and Human Services has made a number of changes to policy, including guidance on food, and over the summer cut funding for $500 million worth of mRNA vaccine development. Trump slapped tariffs on a range of countries around the world on products such as patented drugs, steel and aluminium imports, copper, kitchen and bathroom cabinets, cars, engines and car parts. It's estimated that nearly half of all goods imported into the US now face some level of tariff. A tariff is a tax imposed by a government on imported or exported goods, and it's often used to protect domestic industries from foreign competition by making imported goods more expensive. The tariff is typically paid by the importer at the time of entry and can be a percentage of the goods value or a fixed amount. This extra cost may be passed on to consumers through higher prices. The tariffs have rapidly escalated the average effective US tariff rate, which stood at about 2.3% at the end of 2024, but rose significantly to 15.8% by August 1st, 2025. This policy shift has elevated the risk of a global recession to 40%, up from 30% at the start of 2025. It has contributed to an expected slowdown in global real GDP growth to 1.4% in the fourth quarter of 2025, down from 2.1% earlier in the year. Tensions with China also saw tariff rates soar as high as 104%, which would have equated to about $400 billion tax hike on US entities. And if that had sort of held, would have likely have shrunk the US economy by about 1%, although these tariffs have since been heavily reduced. As mentioned previously, when Trump outlined this in the inaugural address, he promised to increase deportation of illegal immigrants. Monthly arrests by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, have increased from just over 7,000 monthly arrests under the Biden administration to 23,000 monthly arrests by the Trump administration. Under Trump's so-called One Big Beautiful Act, 170 plus billion over 4 years has been allocated for border and interior enforcement. It's a record amount. That equates to $42 billion a year. ICE agents have been filmed around the US abducting people, sometimes in the middle of the street, in towns and cities. Some have been detained and released, others have been shipped abroad, their families unable to contact them. There's been serious moral and constitutional questions thrown at the expansion of deportation provision. Often, these are people who are scheduled to be seen by the courts to determine their legal status and who would otherwise be granted the right to remain in the US. In some cases, ICE agents have entered hearings and arrested immigrants on the spot. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or the Big Beautiful Bill, is a US federal statute signed into law by President Donald Trump on Independence Day on the 4th of July 2025. It contains tax and spending policies forming the core of his second-term agenda. The bill passed the Senate 51-50, with Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. Now, there are some commentators who said there are pros to this new initiative, so that supporters, including the Tax Foundation, have noted that permanently extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts provides stability for households. There's also new short-term tax breaks introduced for key groups. People now can avoid tax on overtime pay and tips. Seniors can get a tax break of up to $6,000, which is expected to help 88% avoid paying tax that funds Social Security. Also, the rules expand Pell Grants, so financial aid to cover job training classes, not just college, but helping more students afford vocational education. There's also been business incentives. New rules offer a great deal of perks for businesses. Key is 20% tax break for many small companies is now permanent. Also, companies that make things that can now be permanently written off at the full cost of new equipment right away, which saves them money. Equipment costs, those are the big upfront costs, which will make financial margins that much narrower. Finally, the law gives bigger tax credits, money back to companies that make more advanced computer chips to encourage them to build more of them in the US. So this is trying to compete with what's going on in the race for AI. Because at the moment, a lot of chips are made abroad and Trump wants to bring them stateside. Over 200 organizations, including major corporations like AT&T and Delta Airlines, supported the bill. The law commits substantial and additional funding of $150 billion to military defense and provides, as previously mentioned, unprecedented extra funding for border security, with the aim of deporting up to 1 million people annually. The cons, the drawbacks, the fiscal instability and debt. The Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO, estimates the law will increase the budget deficit by $2.8 trillion by 2034, with estimates from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget reaching up to $4 trillion. This fiscal burden led Moody's to downgrade US debt, which in the long run will make debt more expensive. There's also an upward wealth transfer. So multiple experts, think tanks and opponents, including Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, described the bill as creating the largest upward transfer of wealth from poor to the rich in American history, exacerbating inequality. CBO analysis projected that by 2034, the highest 10% of earners would see incomes rise by 2.7%. while the lowest would see incomes fall by 3.1% due to cuts to social programs. There'd be damage to social safety net and health, so the CBO estimates that the law would cause 10.9 million Americans to lose health insurance coverage, Public health researchers warned that cuts to health programs could lead up to over 51,000 preventable deaths annually, and the bill implements the largest Medicaid cuts in the program's history, threatening rural hospitals. The law has also been criticised for derailing renewable energy production, which was a big favourite of the Biden administration. So now Trump is favouring fossil fuels. And it's been projected by the non-partisan think tank Energy Innovation to cost more than 830,000 clean energy jobs. As mentioned, there's going to be an expanded immigration enforcement. The law allocates unprecedented funding to ICE, leading critics to warn of anticipated mass detentions and deportations, characterising the funding as setting up a mechanism for child's play compared to prior enforcement efforts. There's also been multiple polls conducted in June 2025 and since that indicated that a majority of Americans oppose the law, with opposition rates ranging from 49 to 64%. Now, the bill being signed by Trump and going through Congress has actually resulted in government shutdown. So the US government shutdown occurred because Republicans and Democrats in Congress failed to agree on and pass a bill funding government services before the previous federal budget expired on the 1st of October. In the US system, Congress must approve a spending plan for the president to sign into law. The reason for the deadlock centers on disagreements over healthcare funding and spending cuts. While Republicans currently control both chambers of Congress, they lack the 60 votes needed in the Senate to pass the spending bill, which gives the opposition Democrats negotiating power. The Democrats are insisting that the final spending bill must include an extension of expiring tax credits that make health insurance cheaper for millions of Americans, a reversal of President Trump's cuts to Medicaid, a government healthcare program used by millions of elderly, disabled, and low-income people, and an opposition to further spending cuts to government health agencies. Republicans, however, want to negotiate the health insurance subsidies separately and pass what they call a clean resolution. This impasse is especially tense because President Trump has already been drastically reducing the size of the national government since returning to office in January, and has threatened to use the current standoff to make further permanent cuts, including potentially firing non-essential workers. The White House has been unwilling to offer substantive concessions, believing Democrats will ultimately bear the public blame, while Democrats believe their efforts to secure cheaper healthcare are popular with voters. The shutdown immediately placed approximately 1.4 million federal employees on unpaid leave or working without pay, leading to disruptions like flight cancellations due to a shortage of unpaid air traffic controllers and the loss of federal funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, which is sort of food stamps, the threatening assistance for 41 million enrolled people. Economically, the stoppage is estimated to knock roughly 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points off economic growth for each week it continues, equating to about $15 billion a week, while also suspending the awarding of an estimated $800 million in new federal contracts each day. So that's the background to these most recent elections. And now we're looking at a lot of Democratic wins. So exactly 1 year after the US re-elected Donald Trump to become the 47th president, the shine on Trump's victory seems to have worn off. Democrats won across the ballot in New York, New Jersey, Virginia, and with redistricting in California. Before we look to New York, I thought it was worth covering the other parts of the US. So there's Mikey Sherrill. Mikey Sherrill is a Democrat and was elected governor of New Jersey on Tuesday by a convincing margin, succeeding the term-limited Phil Murphy. Endorsed by the state's first female governor, Republican Christine Todd Whitman, Sherrill will become the second woman to hold the office when she takes over in January. Her lieutenant governor is Dale Caldwell, president of the Centenary University. Sherrill takes office facing major challenges in the affluent state, including a structural budget deficit, some of the nation's highest property and business taxes, and a planned $2.5 billion annual cut in federal Medicaid aid, which impacts about 1.7 million residents. Her campaign focused on moderate policies and standing up to Donald Trump, a top concern in New Jersey's electricity costs, which soared by 22% over the summer. Cheryl plans to declare a state of emergency on her first day to freeze prices. By forcing negotiations, making it easier to add new electricity generators, and possibly replacing members of the state's utility board. Other goals include increasing budget transparency, hiring more mental health counselors, and banning cell phones from schools. The 53-year-old Cheryl has a distinguished background, starting with 9 years in the Navy, where she served as a helicopter pilot after graduating from the US Naval Academy in 1994. During her service, she also studied at the London School of Economics and worked as a Russian policy officer. After leaving the Navy, she earned her law degree from Georgetown University, worked at a New York firm, and served as a federal prosecutor in Newark, New Jersey. She was first elected to Congress in the 2018 Blue Wave. Cheryl and her investment banker husband, Jason Hedberg, have 4 children, 2 of whom are first-year students at the US Naval Academy. In a different part of America, Abigail Spanberger, a 46-year-old mother of 3, is a former Democratic congressman and CIA officer, was elected as Virginia's next governor, becoming the state's first female chief executive. She defeated Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears after running a campaign focused on affordability and local concerns regarding the impact of federal job cuts, which are highly relevant in Virginia, home to over 300,000 US government workers. Spanberger also frequently linked her opponent to President Donald Trump. Her victory flips control from Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin and is a significant boost for National Democrats, confirming a strategy of winning swing districts and purple states with moderate candidates who have public service and national security backgrounds. Spanberger also served 3 terms in Congress and proclaimed that Virginia had chosen pragmatism over partisanship. She ran a disciplined campaign focusing on economic issues while also criticizing Earl Sears on social issues like abortion access. Her security background earned her the sought-after endorsement of Virginia's Police Benevolent Association. Gonzala won the lieutenant governor's race, and Jay Jones has also won the attorney general race. While her opponent focused heavily on socially conservative issues, Spanberger avoided specifics, choosing instead to support local schools making their own policies. She also highlighted the historical significance of her win, stating that young women in Virginia now know they can achieve anything. And then further west, voters in California have passed Proposition 50, a measure designed to redraw the state's political boundaries in favor of the Democrats. This is a direct counterattack against similar efforts by conservative-led states, part of a national battle for control of the US House of Representatives voting sort of boundaries before the midterms next year. The measure is predicted to give the Democrats a better chance of gaining 5 House seats from the Republicans in the upcoming midterms. Governor Gavin Newsom strongly backed Proposal 50, urging national Democrats to fight fire with fire against Republicans who he claims changed the rules to win. This mid-decade redistricting is unusual, as boundaries are typically withdrawn only once every 10 years following the US Census. Since a state law exists to prevent gerrymandering, California had to call an expensive special election which cost taxpayers over $200 million to bypass the usual independent commission and approve the change directly via voters. This is part of a escalating national political row, while Prop 50 could potentially net the Democrats 5 seats. Republican-led states like Texas, North Carolina, and Ohio have already gained an advantage in around 9 new districts through their own map changes. Experts are concerned that this trend of political gerrymandering is damaging to democracy, risking a breakdown of trust and worsening political division. Following the vote, state Republicans immediately filed a lawsuit challenging Prop 50. A major Supreme Court ruling on how districts are drawn is still expected to affect the midterm elections in 2026. So that's New Jersey, Virginia, and California. Back to the East Coast. On Tuesday, New Yorkers elected Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani is 45 years younger than Trump. He was previously elected as a New York Assembly member in 2020 and ran on rent freezes, universal childcare, free buses, and a proposal to create 5 government-regulated food stores. 14 years ago, Donald Trump led the birther movement, claiming that then-President Barack Obama was Kenyan-born, not American-born, therefore claiming Obama was not a legitimate president. Right-wing activists were creating a fiction that Obama was an African-born Muslim socialist. Now New York has a mayor-elect that is all those things. He's African. He was born in Uganda and became a naturalized American citizen in 2018 and is of South Asian descent. Both parents are from India. His father is an academic, his mother a filmmaker. His child and upbringing has afforded him privilege that most Americans would only dream of attaining. He's Muslim. He's a Shia Muslim, identifying with the Twelver branch. And he is a socialist. He believes in wealth redistribution, the importance of the state in daily life, and is a member of the Democratic Socialists, along with Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. He quoted Pandit Nehru, the architect of Indian democracy and democratic socialism in India, in his victory speech, and the quote was from the independence speech in August 1947. Millennials and Gen Z have been more favourable towards democratic socialism than traditional stance of the Democratic Party. And according to a Gallup poll in September 2025, it showed that 2/3 of Democratic supporters viewed socialism positively. Mamdani defeated former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, where in fact he actually beat Cuomo twice, first in the Democratic primary in the summer, and then in the main election. So Cuomo had lost the Democratic race, but ran as an independent. In his victory speech, Mamdani quoted Cuomo's father, Mario, also a former governor of New York, in saying, "You can campaign in poetry, but you've got to govern in prose," recognising that it's one thing getting elected, it's something quite else governing. And on that note, Mamdani's actually put together his transition team to build the staffing that's required to help support him deliver his policies. And in America, there's not really a civil service. Well, there is a civil service, but it doesn't exist in the same way. So every administration has to recruit thousands of new staff. And that transition team is an all-women's team, very formidable group of people that Mamdani has picked, and he's proving that he's serious about what comes next. I watched one of Mamdani's last Instagram videos before the polls closed, and he said just that. He was keen to ensure election success was not his greatest achievement, but just the beginning. And this is the true test. It's one thing for a 34-year-old assembly member to be beating a member of a political dynasty in his own backyard. It's another governing a city of 8.5 million people with a budget in excess of $110 billion. To me, this marks a generational shift in thinking. A millennial underdog beats a seasoned and morally suspect baby boomer. And the Democrats do have an age problem in their party. Many of the Democrat leaders and recent leadership are very old. Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, is 74. Minority Whip Dick Durbin is 80. And Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, remains in Congress aged 85, although she's recently announced in the last few days that she is retiring from politics in 2027. Joe Biden, president until January of this year, is 82. There is an interesting mix of generations within the party that's now emerged. So you've got the boomers, you've got Schumer, Durbin, Pelosi, Biden, and just about Barack Obama. The boomers believe in big government, but are insistent on doing things the old-fashioned and often very slow way. The Generation Xers are Kamala Harris, 61, formerly vice president and the Democratic presidential nominee in 2024. Gavin Newsom, 55, who's the governor of California. Hakeem Jeffries, 55, who's the House Democrat leader. and Josh Shapiro, 51, who's the governor of Pennsylvania. The Gen Xers are smart political operators and are showing signs of deploying populist policies and in some cases directly challenging Trump's media style. All you've got to do is Google Gavin Newsom and you'll see what I mean. These guys are funded by the Democratic Party machine, but until the boomers retire or frankly pass on to the pearly gates, they're stuck playing second fiddle. In essence, they are the children waiting for their elderly parents to die so they can get the inheritance. And then you've got the millennials. So you've got Pete Buttigieg, 43, former transport secretary under Biden. You've got Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, known widely as AOC, who's 36, in the House of Representatives, representing New York. And obviously you've got Zohran Mamdani, 34. And I also like to put Bernie Sanders, 84, into this mix as well, because really he's a millennial at heart. The millennials are superior communicators to any of the previous generations. They do well on old and new media. They rarely get big money donations, so they rely on small but frequent donations and grassroots activism. They believe the old guard have to step aside to save America. Now, within this group, you've got, Pete Buttigieg, very strong on Republican leading media outlets. He used to be mayor of South Bend in Indiana. He's a potential US presidential pick for 2028. He's gay, from Midwest, had a successful term as Biden's transport secretary. AOC has mastered Instagram Live, popping up online to give summaries of business in Congress, campaigns she's running and policies that she's floating. She's dynamic, energizing and tough. And she's also being touted as a potential US presidential frontrunner for the Democrats in 2028. Zohran Mamdani's social media team has been on fire this election season and campaign, keeping it real, not being too slick, getting celebrity endorsements relevant to New York, combined with Mamdani's charisma and quick put-downs of the political establishment. The wider team can be incredibly proud of their achievement, and Mamdani's approach is something AOC, Pete Buttigieg and others should take note of if they're to get anywhere near the Democratic Party nomination in 2028. Overall, Tuesday was a good day for progressive Democrats, although I would argue Gavin Newsom's redistricting is pretty anti-democratic, and a bad night for Donald Trump. In claiming that Barack Obama was an African Muslim socialist nearly 15 years ago, he's accidentally manifested a real African-born Muslim socialist in New York. Be careful what you wish for, Donald. XOXO. So that's all from me, folks. Next time I'll be reunited with Sid and Lily as we complete our two-parter on lessons from conflict and peace. This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening to the Political Dispatch.